as a goal to improve the physical and mental health of our students. We have several of the board of directors here this evening, so I'd like to just acknowledge them and for their work and commitment in this area. First is Linda Palsky, board member, Chip Taylor, board member, and board of director president Christine Toy-Dragoni. So that work was sidetracked, unfortunately, due to COVID, but we learned a lot of lessons during that time, one of those being the importance of sleep time. I'm excited to continue the work of my predecessors in addressing the mental health of our students, and this is an area personally that's very important to me as the superintendent of schools. To help with our planning regarding start time, we've asked parents, students, and staff members to fill out a survey, and we had over 3,500 respondents. We've also reassembled our start time committee who are going to review some various scenarios. This evening, Dr. Bert Mandelbaum, chairperson of the pediatrics department at Penn Medicine, Princeton Health Center, is going to present the science behind adolescent sleep patterns and also explain why the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends later high school start times. Dr. Mandelbaum is a noted expert in school start times and has guided several districts in this work. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mandelbaum.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Are you guys okay? I'm triple vaxxed if I take this off for talking. All right, thank you, everybody. And thank you to those of you who are here, and I'm sure there are many at home, and I'll do my best to make it as engaging as possible to both, which is not all that easy, but I'll do the best I can. To start, just to tell you, so I'm a pediatrician. I've been in practice for about 20 years. I'm the chair of pediatrics at Penn Medicine. And those two roles, we were seeing patients and we were seeing an increase in mental health, and I'll show you some slides. But then in my role as chair of pediatrics, we were starting to really see an increase in mental health issues showing up in our ER. And again, I'll show you that data when we get into it. And we weren't sure why that was. And it's not just because of sleep and school start times, so don't get me wrong, that is not the issue. But we were trying to figure out what are some of the possible solutions. And then in 2014, another one of my roles is I became a school physician, and ultimately I was helping a few different districts all across the bridge in New Jersey. And at the year that I became school physician, the American Academy of Pediatrics put out a policy statement on school start times, a concept I hadn't really thought about. And as I was working with the schools and trying to understand what was happening there, we started to realize that there really is a difference in the amount of sleep people get and how that impacts everything. And that's what a lot of this talk is going to be about as I show you the evidence for that. And that led me to talking about this a lot, speaking to a lot of people, and probably around 2018, the New Jersey American Academy of Pediatrics, we started a task force of which I chair, which is trying to talk about adolescent sleep and how that relates to school start times. So this is just about education. This is not trying to about convincing anyone to do things you don't want to do, but we want to talk about the science and show you how it's possible so you guys can make your own decisions. All right, so those are the two goals, right? The first goal, I'll see where I actually need to look. The first goal is to bring awareness of these issues, and the second one is to kind of help you guys as the stakeholders figure out what's important to you, decide on your priorities, and once you're armed with this information, figure out where you want to take it. So there's generally two aspects to the talk, and sometimes I do this. Princeton, 2 years ago, it might be 3 years ago now, changed their school start times. And sometimes I do this talk in tandem with the person who was the high school principal. She's now left to a different school for Princeton, because she talks about the actual obstacles and how they did it. There's lots of districts who did it. Radnor, which is not too far from here, their superintendent is a great advocate for it, but my part is always the why. So we're going to start with the why. We'll get into that, and we'll talk about these issues, where school start time started from, because if you don't know that, everyone says, well, there must be a good reason for that. We'll talk about the science, we'll talk about the mental health issues, and then I'll show you all the evidence, and then we'll get into the other aspects of how it's possible. So let's start. So the first thing, early school start times, there's one reason that they started, right? No one has ever said, let's make a high school student, let's make a 16-year-old get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and learn at 7. Like that they thought that was a good idea. Schools typically start at 9 o'clock. So in Pennsylvania, there is a law on the books from the 1940s that schools have to start at 9 a.m. It's still there, unless a school kind of tells you otherwise. So nobody does it, but that was when school started. School started at 9. Districts got bigger. There were only so many buses. You couldn't start everyone at the same time. And so you had to run 2 routes. And so one school started at 9 and one started at 8. And then districts got even bigger and you ran 3 routes. And that's how, is that what Pennsbury is now? Do you have 3 routes? So that's what a lot of districts are. And so you can't start at the same time. So someone starts early. And it seemed like it would make sense that adolescents would do this. So that's the first part. The second thing we're going to talk about is that mental health issues have been on the rise. And I'll show you data for that. What you have to then buy into is that there is an abundance of evidence that if you don't get enough sleep, it's going to make everything worse. And I'll show you, and it's going to impact education, it impacts mental health, it impacts physical health, it impacts sports, your athletic performance, your reaction time, your recovery for injuries, it impacts safety, it impacts risk-taking. And so I'm going to show you why school start times make kids not sleep. And I'm going to show you that not sleeping ultimately ends up in causing lots of bad things. Those are the things it does. And by the way, I'll show you evidence that when they sleep better, these things all improve. We'll show there's multiple reasons for this. So it's not just about school start times. I understand there's lots of things keeping adolescents up at night. The long story short, though, is they cannot go to sleep early enough to get adequate sleep based on our school start times. And the only reason they wake up is because we make them, right? We're telling them school starts at a certain time. I'll show you the recommendations, and then I'll show you that the policy changes have actually been effective. So, like I said, schools, parents, most of the parents right now are probably of the generation of 80s, 90s that they went to high school. So there is a lot of this feeling of, I did it. Like, it was fine for me. Maybe you don't remember how tired you were then, but that was not the generation before you. So if you look back, when we start to go back to the 70s and beyond, school never started this early. Again, it was a transportation issue. That was the only issue. And like I said, there is still that law on the books right now in Pennsylvania. Schools have to start at 9 o'clock unless you tell them otherwise. So the key point, and I'm going to throw some myth busters in there as we're talking, is that there is no educational benefit, right? That is not why we're starting school early. It's an operational issue, and it really is a transportation issue. And not to say that the transportation aspect of it is not a problem that needs to be solved, but that is what we're talking about. School starts early because we have so many buses, so many bus drivers, and someone has to start early, and we've decided it should be the high school students. So let's talk about adolescence for a second and the adolescent brain. So there's this general thought that adolescents who could look like adults are like adults, and you probably hear conversations of like, I get up early, you can get up early, you know, suck it up, the real world is tough, you know, you get used to it. Adolescence physiology is different than the adult physiology, and we're going to get to what's critical, which is the circadian rhythms. But the big thing to remember about their brain is this is a huge period of rapid brain development. They think it's secondary to infancy, so we know in infancy things are expanding. Adolescence is a critical time period, and that goes probably through age 25. And you know, you'll see them talking about that in marijuana laws, where we're talking about, you know, a adult utilizing marijuana is different than a teenager using marijuana because their brain is different. Brain is rapidly maturing. Adolescents, you guys have probably had these experiences. You could have opportunities. I have 2 teenagers. There are times that they are pleasant and normal, and they act, and I could talk with them, and we talk politics or talk about whatever. And those are generally what they call cold environments. So these are times when the adolescents feel good about themselves, they're relaxed, they had adequate sleep, they're not pressured by their friends. Then there's the hot environments, and those are the times that the amygdala takes over and the adolescents act like my teens who drive me crazy, which are, and they make impulsive decisions, they're irrational, their emotions are very labile, and they're kind of going back and forth. And that happens when they're around their friends, is one thing that kicks them into that. The other thing is when they are sleep deprived. So that leads to decisions made by the amygdala. That puts them, the amygdala is that part of the brain that does the fight or flight. And so you get many more impulsive decisions when adolescents are sleep deprived, and I'll show you the data for that. And you can imagine that that doesn't lead to anything good. Put that together, do you guys let your seniors out early? Like, what time does school get out here? 2? And do seniors, can they get out even earlier than that? If they finish their classes? Some districts will have, like, you can end at, like, if you're a senior and you finish your classes, you're out at noon. One of my districts does that. But you have adolescents, sleep deprived, out of the house at 2 o'clock with no adults around, tired, with lots of opportunities to make ill-advised decisions. All right, so let's talk about sleep. This is a critical part of the talk, and I think people have changed their attitude about what sleep means. So the idea of, like, you'll sleep when you're dead, or it's not important to sleep, or I think we've mostly gone past that, and I'll show you some slides of why it's so important. But this is really when the brain is kind of processing all that information. So the brain is super active during sleep. The body needs to rest. The brain needs to do all of this stuff. And what happens in sleep, there's basically, we think that there's 2 processes that drive sleep. So there's one process that is basically the longer you're up, the more tired your body gets. But the other one is that your brain needs to relax. There's kind of hormones that drive this, and those 2 things need to match. And it kind of looks like that. So you need to have both of these things. So you guys have probably been tired in the middle of the day, and you're like, I wish I can go to sleep, and you say you can, but you can't. Like, because those 2 things need to, or maybe you can, but those, in general, those 2 things need to match. And so the bottom one is that circadian rhythm. Here's what happens in adolescence, and I'll just show you, I'll show you the slide in a second. So what happens in adolescence is there's going to be a shift. So remember, I said before, I am not blaming all the things that keep adolescents up on the early school start times. Like, that's not it. Like, there's a lot of reasons why kids don't go to sleep early. So I delineated them here, and you've seen them. So your homework policies, our teens are all trying to get into Penn or Princeton or whatever Ivy League school they think they have to get into. So they're padding their resume. They have a gazillion activities. We put a ton of pressure. The districts try not to, and they put a ton of pressure. Everyone's taking multiple AP classes. So there's a litany of things that keep the kids going, and then there's their phones and screen time and all those other reasons. All that falls under sleep hygiene, right? And there's a whole lot that you could do as a community to promote good sleep education for yourselves and for your kids, where you say, I'm gonna try to work and try to get them to bed consistently. Sleep is important. We're gonna make sure you get sleep. Sleep is not the thing you should be giving up on. But even if you did all of that, the big issue is you cannot get them to sleep earlier than 10:30 on average for most kids. So I get it that there'll be someone in the audience that says, my kid can. My daughter is a freshman, I think went to sleep before 10 last night. She was exhausted. But in general, that's not what they're able to do. And that's different than when they were younger, right? So when they were younger, you used to put them to bed at 7:30 or 8, and then it was 8, 8:30. What happens in these around 12, 13 through 21 is that there is this shift in their circadian rhythm. So it is a biologically driven shift that their melatonin is released later, so not earlier, so you don't have those 2 things matching. Their body might be tired, but their brain isn't. And that melatonin continues to be released through the night, through the early morning, only stopping around 7 a.m. So there is, in essence, a 2 to 3 hour shift for what their body feels like than what you as parents feel like. So you're exhausted. A lot of parents of teenagers are probably going to sleep earlier than their kids are going to sleep. You're waking up earlier, but the kids physiologically can't get to sleep much earlier than 10:30 or 11. And that is the crux of what's happening, because they're going to sleep at 10:30 or 11, and they would be sleeping on their own 8 o'clock, 8:30. Never mind the fact that they're exhausted, and then on the weekends they'll sleep till noon that you can watch them. But in general, if you left them to their devices, they would not be getting up much before 8, 8:30 if they went to sleep at 10:30 every night. They would be sleeping in till at least that time. So none of them want to get up at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning. There's only one reason they do, is because you're making them get up because they have to start school. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Melatonin, so you guys all hear about melatonin, right? It's a hormone released from the pineal gland, And the idea of melatonin is it is the hormone that helps to regulate sleep. It is we have it in all humans, but we see it in all animals. And one of the things that we see is this is not something just in humans, just in 2021. We see this in animals because it switches in teens. We think it has something to do with, we see animals have a change in their breeding cycles during their reproductive season. So we don't know how melatonin impacts that, but again, we see that during that time period. And again, this has been studied, and we'll see this, I'll put this all up here, we'll see this throughout the world. It is not just us that we see it. Again, it's not a United States problem, it's not a Pennsylvania, it's not a Pennsbury issue. It is an issue that we have known. We're just now finally, we've actually realized this since the 90s. We were starting to talk about it. The guidelines came out in 2014. But the evidence of what we started to do in the 80s, we started to realize a decade later of how difficult that we're making it for teenagers. So again, it releases at 10:30 or 11, continues well past sunrise. So remember, as you're trying to wake them up, their body is physiologically trying to stay asleep. It occurs worldwide. And the result is that for teens, their preferred bedtime is delayed. So 2 to 3 hours, give or take. Girls seem to be a little less than boys for whatever reason. Ultimately, what that means is that teens probably want to go to sleep 10:30, 11, and they want to sleep till 7. Now remember, when you're talking about sleep, it is not just the quantity of sleep, so it's not just hours, but it's also the quality of sleep. So not only are they not getting enough sleep, and I'll show you why in a second, but they are getting woken up at a time period when their body is really trying to stay asleep. So imagine the time that you guys were getting up. If you normally get up at 6, 6:30 in the morning, and you set your alarm for a plane, and you got up at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, that feeling that you have of being woken up off cycle when you're not ready to wake up, it is really hard to shake that, and that is what the teens feel like all day. So this is what it looks like to them. So you can see that sleep cycle shift where it normally is for you guys. It shifts for them, and then it goes back. So this does not stay forever. It's into like early 20s. By the early 20s, they start to have a more normal kind of adult sleep pattern. We're going to just pass some of this. This is the CDC. CDC says kids should get about 8 to 10 hours of sleep in that age range. It's probably 8.5 to 9.25 hours when they look at it. So that's what we want our adolescents to get. Call it a minimum of 8, but we're really shooting for 8.5 to 9 hours of sleep. So that's what we want. And here's the myth buster. It is almost impossible to get teens to sleep enough. And again, if you're putting them to sleep, if they can't go to sleep before 10:30 or 11, and you want them to get 8 hours of sleep, they're not getting up till 6:30 or 7 in the morning. And then you have to give them time to get ready, go to school, and I'll show you how that works out. But that is why, have you guys surveyed your students on how much sleep they get? What was the average, do you know? Yeah, so Dr. Smith said 6 hours. Every school district, it's 6.25 hours. Like on average, that's what they're getting. 2 hours less of sleep a night, and we'll show you what that means. So what does it look like? So I did not know that your guys' school start time started at 7:20. One of the districts that I worked for started at 7:20. So this is perfect to use. Let's talk about that. If you're starting at 7:20, do your buses arrive early? A lot of times they arrive. So if you're free breakfast, you have to get there earlier. So the buses might be trying to show up at 7 o'clock. The buses are showing up at 7 o'clock. If a route's 45 minutes, there are kids who are getting picked up probably in your district at 6:15 in the morning, if not a little earlier. I have 2 kids, high school. If they're going to walk to the bus, God forbid they miss the bus, so they leave the house 10 minutes before they have to be at the bus stop. So now they're leaving the house at 6 o'clock in the morning. You guys all look, everyone here looks nicely dressed. You guys, when you left your house today, how much time did you allow yourself before you had to leave? Like, did you get up and shower and get ready? Then, and then you had to commute to work. So, but if you're getting yourself ready, how much time is reasonable? 45 minutes? Like, what do you want to give a 15-year-old girl who wants going to school, who needs to feel good about themselves, to like get ready, eat breakfast? So give them 45 minutes. I'd love to give them an hour, but give them 45 minutes. So 45 minutes to get ready, 10 minutes to walk to the bus, 45 minutes to get to school. And if that's going to start and work backwards from 7 o'clock in the morning, you have kids in your district who are waking up at 5:30 in the morning, if not earlier, every day. remembering that their body is trying to keep them asleep till 7 o'clock in the morning, and they probably didn't go to sleep till at least 11. If they did their best and their parent got them to sleep at 11, that's 6.5 hours of sleep, and they feel crummy, and that's the way they're starting their day at a time when everything seems chaotic for them in life. So working backwards, that's what we did, what we were talking about. So if you wanted them to go to sleep at 10:30 or 11, we said, like, we'll accept that. We want them to sleep even 8 hours. That puts them at 6:30 or 7, which then means you really have to start school at, this is where they said 8:30. But, and every district's a little different, 8 o'clock, but you need that extra time to try to allow them to get a little bit more sleep. So mental health issues, I don't think anyone needs me to beat this up, but we know, so this is pre-pandemic, as I was talking about this. There was data from looking at 8 years, 07 to 15, and basically it doubled, right? So that says in red, we went from 500,000 to 1 million suicidal attempts in a year, in those years. Now, this is what we were seeing when I was looking at Princeton, and if you look at the same time period that I was looking at it, we went from 08 to 15, and it doubled. So we were seeing the same thing locally. This is not someone else's problem. This is what we were seeing. This is in our ER, people who came in with suicide attempts during that time period. Then I looked at it again in 2018. Look what happened. So this was pre-pandemic. It jumped to almost 500, so almost tripled during that time period. This came out October 19th, 2 weeks ago, and just looking at it, because it's easier to see here, when they were comparing now versus 2 years ago, remember 3 years ago was that compared to where it was, it basically doubled again in suicide attempts. So that's what we're seeing now versus pre-pandemic. So if there's anyone who doesn't think that we're dealing with a mental health crisis, I think everyone does, so I don't need to beat that up. So we need to do something. Oh, here, I blew it up for us. And this is where it is. In addition, emergency department visits for suspected suicide attempts increased nearly 51% among girls 12 to 17 in early 2021 compared to 2019. Lots of things they said to do, and one of it is make better policies, help the kids out. All right, so is it not, I'm going to just, I think you all believe that not going to sleep is bad for you, but let's go through all the different things. So we have the American Academy of Sleep Medicine saying that we need to do this. We have from the CDC's website all the bad physical things that happen. If you go to torture websites, you can do that online, and here a brief history of torture, and it tells you, and you see this on all your spy shows, right? What do you do if you're gonna torture somebody? You don't let them sleep. So all the things that happen from sleep deprivation, it's our mental health issues. So let me just go through these, and I'm not going to go through these studies. I'll just show you what these studies are, and I'll hit you with the conclusions. Daytime sleepiness predicts future suicidal behavior. Conclusion, daytime sleepiness appears to be a significant predictor of subsequent suicidal behaviors in adolescence. Relationship between sleep and adolescent depression. Our findings add strength to the evidence that of the association between short sleep duration and depression. Association of longitudinal sleep trajectories with risky sexual behavior. In summary, our findings show a potential role of sleep disturbance in contributing to adolescent risk-taking behaviors, including sexual risk-taking, multi-pronged strategies such as delaying school start times. Letting adolescents out of school early, so we talked about this. While they're not under your supervision, here's all the, lots of things you can imagine when they're able to kind of be more impulsive without guidance, sleep deprived. Self-reported sleep and circadian characteristics about substance abuse. Same thing. Our conclusions ultimately say that more sleep, less sleep, more substance abuse. What about physical health? If you guys ever want to watch a scary TED Talk, so Matt Walker does a TED Talk on this, where sleep is your superpower. So not sleeping increases your risk of cancer. There's a direct relationship of less sleep with mortality. And if you don't think that changing a little bit makes a difference, so we're about to go fall backwards and gain an hour in a week or two, right? When you look at ER data, in the 24 hours after you fall backwards, there is a 21% decrease in heart attacks. Move to the spring, lose an hour of sleep, in those next 24 hours, there's almost a 25% increase in heart attacks. 1 hour, one 24-hour period. All right, what are we in school for? Lots of things, but one of it is learning. I think you could all imagine that learning is negatively impacted by not sleeping. Lots of studies that show this. So this one, they made them sleep 5 hours or 9 hours, and what do you think happened? The kids who slept 9 hours retained a heck of a lot more than the kids who slept 5 hours. Some more mythbusters I threw in here. So the mythbuster, is sleep important? Yeah, it's important for everything. Health, mental health, education, and that an extra 45 minutes, like, I think, I'll talk about this at the end. Once you get to like 25, 30 minutes, you're making a difference. If you can get 25, 30 minutes more of sleep, every bit counts. You don't have to, like, I'm not asking anyone to talk about starting school. I would love school to start at 11 a.m. if possible. I'm not asking anyone to do that. But making changes an hour makes a huge difference. Sleep and athletic performance. So I serve in New Jersey, we have the NJSIIA, it's the athletic committee, and I serve as on their sports medicine advisory committee. And I'm lecturing in a week with the Jets sports performance expert to the New Jersey athletic trainers on sleep and sports performance. So one of the obstacles that people will talk about, and we'll get to it at the end, is how are you going to do sports, right? The sports are negatively impacted. It's going to push everything back. And not one school that moved it back has ever lost sports. Lots of schools locally in Pennsylvania have talked about their secret sauce being more sleep, and they've won championships. But what we do know is that more sleep increases your athletic performance, it decreases your reaction time, and it decreases your risk for injury. So if we're really talking about sports, and I'm going to show you this, what you want to do is you want to get the kids to sleep more. So there's a gazillion studies in here. I'm just going to fly through. Sleep extension improves serving accuracy in tennis. Sleep deprivation on the effect on volleyball players and on runners, and it negatively impacted them. Sleep deprivation on reaction time. It didn't impact anaerobic power in this study, but it significantly impacted reaction time. Sleep on sports injuries. Terrible, it increased the risk of sports injuries. Sleep on the impact on college basketball players. Better free throws, better three-pointers. Like, who doesn't want that? Sleep on optimizing recovery, clear negative effects of sleep deprivation on recovery. Conclusion, I love this. Athletes can train themselves to improve their sleep if they have deficits, which by all measures should translate into improved performance. Therefore, the old saying, you snooze, you lose, should actually read to athletes, you snooze more, you win. Value of sleep on athletic performance injury. Everyone just saying the same thing. More sleep is better. Sleep improves athletic performance, on and on. Right now, I don't know, you guys are Philly fans probably. I'm a Yankee fan, so I hate the Astros. This is pre-pandemic, this slide. So the Astros cheated, they beat the Yankees, and Justin Verlander, their ace. But this is the New York Times from 2019. And so this is the headline, Justin Verlander, the Astros ace and sleep guru. And he's talking to Alex Bregman, who was the third baseman, and basically saying, you haven't hit home runs, and Bregman's complaining, and Justin Verlander said, how much do you sleep? He said, I think 6 hours a night, and he said, that's not enough, which is what your students are sleeping. So he slept 10 hours a night, and then he hit 30 home runs after that. So that's not a promise that you'll do that, but that's at a major league level. This is what major league professional athletes are talking about in terms of sleep, which is why you're seeing people like the Jets or the Washington Nationals have people on their team talking to their professional athletes about maximizing sleep. All right, so more mythbusters. If you delay school start times, the truth is it will positively impact sports by improving performance and decreasing injuries. Auto accidents, these are devastating. So and what we see, because of reaction time, teens are bad drivers, that we see sleep-deprived adolescents getting into more accidents, and studies have borne them out. This is a study from Virginia. It looked at 2 different counties, one that changed school start times, one that didn't. There were 2 less accidents per 1,000 kids in a 2-year period, per year in a 2-year period based on this. And that's the study. Later school start times, here's another one linked to fewer car crashes. And what are the positives? So it's not just about all the bad stuff that happens if you're doing it. The fact is, if you get them to sleep more, all this stuff gets better. So, and we've seen this, and I'll show you some of these evidence. 8 hours seems to be the tipping point. So this is not just me. I know the board has talked about this, but this is coming from really, none of this is controversial, actually. It's a pretty easy topic to talk about because everyone is supportive. The only people that talk about it is they say it's hard to do, but no one says it's not worth it to do it. So American Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Sleep Medicine, the CDC, in New Jersey, the county health rankings, which are what all the public health officers use, so all of them, take the same guidelines. Middle school, high school should start at 8:30, not earlier than that, to improve sleep. Won't torture you with the policies. All right, let's go to the evidence. So in Seattle, they did this, and they did a great study. They changed school start times. They measured sleep pre and post, and what did they find? You'll see a meta-analysis, but basically, every time you do this, you get more sleep. Somewhere between half a minute to a minute of increased sleep for every minute that you delay your school start times. They use Fitbits to actually measure this, and they found 34 minutes and I think they increased it by like 55 minutes. A year later, they still found all these benefits. Longer sleep duration, less jet lag, that's that weekend sleeping in, better attendance, less tardiness, increased academic performance, and the students themselves said their mood was better. And then here's the meta-analysis that in general, for every 25 to 60 minutes, when you look at all these studies, total sleep time increased from 25 to 77 minutes per weeknight. So just assume at least a half a minute to a minute. Some of that is dependent upon how much a community talks about the rationale for doing it. So if you just implement these policies, you don't get nearly as much benefit as implementing the policies and educating your students and families about why sleep is important, why you're doing this, or one of the reasons why you're doing it. Conclusion of their literature review, evidence supports these non-experimental findings that delaying school start times improves sleep. Here's another one, association with delayed school start times with sleep duration. And again, over and over again, I'll go through these studies. They just all find the same thing. Association between school start times and sustained attention. This one, they pushed it an hour, found 34 minutes of sleep. And again, it was another one, found significant improvements in attention and academic performance. In COVID, we started to see studies saying, as the kids are sleeping more, we're seeing the positive benefits of this just with virtual education, and I'll hit that later in the end. So again, mythbusters. One, teens will not stay up later, especially if you educate them on why, so you'll get the benefit of increased sleep if you move your school start times back, and this is possible. Lots of evidence that schools have done it and actually seen this benefit. It's not just theoretical. All right. It's a pretty popular topic these days. So there's a RAND Corporation analysis in 2017, and ultimately, a little fuzzy math, but they looked at mortality and kind of the cost of a life with car accidents and found that we as a society would save, in a 15-year period, $140 billion if we actually move school start times for everybody. Most of that was from decreased car crashes. Some of it was from better education, and ultimately what the impact of that would be. Editorials, this is from New Jersey, this is the EducationNext, the school board magazine. Students getting in it, and students are the biggest piece of the puzzle that are missed, right? As we make these decisions, the students aren't really there at the table, and when they are, sometimes their perspective is askew, like they just want to get out early. They don't care the impact to them, but when you really talk to them, they'll talk to you about how the mornings are terrible for them. This seems probably appropriate to what I saw locally when I looked at you guys. Almost the majority of schools are still not doing this, right? So most of the schools are in the 7 to 8 time frame, and I started to look at local schools in your district before I came here, and I had to stop. Everyone was like 7:20, 7:30. It was just heartbreaking to see. And it's no different. This is Central Jersey. Like, Princeton, you could see as the outlier there at 8:20. Legislative efforts. So I don't know what's happening locally in Pennsylvania, but let me just talk to you for a moment about. So first, there is a competition between should you guys do this grassroots locally and should it be done on a bigger field. So The reality is it should be done. I'd love to see it federally. I'd love to see it from a statewide perspective because there's so many, you don't live in a vacuum, and changing the times across other districts that you might be competing against makes everything easier. But the reality is that's not easy to accomplish. So I'll show you what California did. California just did it. They're the first state. I'll talk to you about New Jersey in a second. And if we're waiting for them, we have, how many students are in your district? 10,000. And what about in the high school? 3. So I'm here, I get paid nothing. I'm doing this for no other reason other than there's 3,000 students in this district that every year suffer because we can't get our act together to try to figure out how to help them. And that's what so this ideally, I would love to see it on a bigger picture, but still schools and school start times, this is a really local decision still, unfortunately. And so it's up to local towns to think this through. So let's talk about the legislation. So California in 2018 actually passed legislation. So it passed the Assembly, it passed the House, and then the governor vetoed it. So this is Governor Brown at that time, and anyone want to guess why he vetoed it? It was the California Teacher Association, and so there was no argument against the science. They said, great idea, but it should be a local decision. It shouldn't be a statewide decision. So they vetoed it, and that's what he said. And then Senator Portantino, who was the one who was sponsoring the legislation, came back, and he brought it back, got it back against the House, through the House and Senate, had the California Parent Teachers Association kind of help co-sponsor it, and got it passed again the next year, and Governor Newsom signed it into law. So as of next year, it goes into effect. And basically what they say is you can't start earlier than 8 for middle school and 8:30, is that what it is, right? 8 for middle school and 8:30 for high schools. They allowed some caveats, like rural areas might be able to start at 8, but in general, they put a floor in there. New Jersey, so New Jersey has Senator Cody, who wrote an editorial about this, and he was pushing it. Let me get to what he ended up doing. So he sponsored a bill right before the pandemic that was basically saying we should do a study on this. I wasn't super excited about another study that showed when we have a ton of evidence, and he wanted to do a pilot program. Turned out the pilot program, no one wanted to do the pilot program, and so it's kind of been, nothing ended up happening with it. And as of now, we have a legislator who crafted a legislation in New Jersey to actually mirror California's legislation. It's a long way from a legislator crafting legislation to getting something, but we're actually starting to get some headway there in New Jersey. Local, Pennsylvania, in 2019, you guys had a bipartisan joint commission study of this. And so if you want to just look and figure out, is what I'm saying accurate and is there any validity to it, their joint commission basically went through all the evidence and hit all these points. Sleep is important. The kids are not getting enough sleep. School policies should change to reflect the importance of sleep, and that we should push it to 8:30. So the advisory committee recognized establishing later school start times has the potential to positively impact the epidemic of sleep deprivation. And then it said the other things that we talked about, right? That there are other factors. Appropriate education and support for healthy sleep habits is also recommended to strengthen and sustain those benefits. But that's you guys. That's your state 2 years ago, right before the pandemic. So lots of schools have been successful. Most of the schools are still not doing this. I talked to you about Princeton. I think Radnor is another great school to look to see how they did it. For those of you guys who don't know, they also were on a triple tier, and they switched some stuff around, right? So their middle school was 750. Their middle school was 8. They dropped that to 750. Their high school was 730. They moved that to 8:30, and they left their elementary school basically at 9 o'clock. My town, Montgomery, it's where I live, we were at 7:20. They just moved school to 7:45 this year. They were able to just push it back and be a little bit more efficient in the route. So they didn't switch anything. And it was a small win, but 25 minutes and the students are already saying they could feel a difference. I like to, I don't know if you guys know Freehold, Bruce Springsteen. It's a 6-school district. For some reason, they have 3 winners and 3 losers, right? 3 at 7:30 and 3 at 8:30. So I don't know how they chose that, but like in the idea that you can't do this. They have one district, it's one high school district, and they have 3 of them that could start at 8:30. So somehow or another, they're able to operationalize it and have all the after-school activities. And all right, Cincinnati, here's a lesson about when people tell you things can't be done. So Cincinnati was looking to do this, and there was an estimate that it would cost $50 million in transportation costs, so they could not change the school start times. And then they had a new director, and they found a way to resolve it without any money. So like that's a relatively big swing. So the answer is don't stop when you hear something you don't like. There's usually, most transportation directors will say that there is a cost-neutral solution, whether you like it or not, or whether there's a better way to do it, but there's always a way to kind of make things work. So what are the obstacles? First and foremost is transportation. We'll talk about that. Then there's sports. Then there's life. There's teacher schedules, parent schedules, and then there's all the other stakeholders and after-school activities. And what's not on here is change, right? Like it is just hard to make change. So what are the solutions? So transportation, this is what initiated it, right? This is what started these conversations where we have too many kids, we have to run multiple routes, so it is a transportation problem, and this costs money. So this takes real analysis, right? So again, there is a cost-neutral solution to this, but this is the type of thing where you should be analyzing your transportation and figuring out what are the most efficient ways that we could do this. Let's think about what we want, and then let's try to figure out how we can get there. Successful districts, they examine bus routes, they tighten them, shaving off time, they repurpose bus drivers. So Princeton did this, trying to use, so they weren't hiring subcontractors for out-of-district routes. They found funding to go from triple tier to double tier. So some districts have said instead of 3 start times, we'll find a way to make it 2 start times. And then sometimes they swapped. In a perfect world, the younger kids generally are up earlier and can go to school earlier. And how great would it be to have a younger, you have a 5-year-old in many districts who get off the bus at 4:30, 4:30, and it's dark out, right? So they get up at 6, they're playing video games or watching TV till 9, till they have to go to school. Then they come home from school and it's dark and they're back to watching TV. It'd be great to get them to school early and let the adolescents sleep in. There's lots of issues with that, but if there were in a perfect world, that's how I would set things up. High school sports, so like I said, the issue with high school sports when people talk about are the adult obstacles. These are not kid-related obstacles. It's how do we make it work? And there's a couple of things. So like when you break it down, there's practices. Practices should not be impacted by a delayed start time. I mean, they might start a little later, but if you look at your practices, and it depends on the sport, a lot of times we are not efficient with it. So sometimes the coaches like the practices to go longer, the kids like hanging out. You can make practices 90 minutes and be efficient and get everything you need out of it. So you can easily make practices shorter or more efficient and get the kids home so they have more family time. Remember, these are student athletes who are kids. Like they belong with their families just as much as they want to be on the field, and they should have that time to get back. Then there's the games, and that's an issue if you have district that you're playing people and you start much later than them. Didn't make a difference with Princeton, right? The AD called the other districts and said, we might show up a little late. And they had solutions to that. They sometimes had games running in parallel. Instead of having freshmen sitting and watching a game, they were able to get a couple of extra refs because they had 2 fields for soccer, and they had 2 games going at the same time. And that's really away games. Home games, if you're the later district, it's not really a big deal. By the time the other school gets to you, you're getting out, you warm up, and you can get there. So that's really not the issue. Then there's the missed class time. Again, this is really just for away games. So this is a small sliver of what the students' lives are, but there's lots of things you could do. So for those away games, and so there's option, do you guys have option 2 programs here? So New Jersey had the ability to count sports as a gym, but do you guys have rotating bell schedule here? So some districts, what they'll do is, as they've done this, they have changed the bell schedule. So a Monday might be different than a Tuesday. And so if you are missing your last class because you have to go somewhere, your last class is not always the same. Or you make your last class gym, or for the athletes during that season, you try to make it so it's a class that's not a core academic class, so it becomes less of an issue to miss. The other thing, Radnor did a great job with this. The time that you take to delay your school start times does not have to be the time that your school ends, right? So Radnor found a way to shave off, I think it was 15 minutes or so, 18 minutes, by walking through the day and saying, where can I shave off a couple of minutes? How much time do we need between these classes? Can I make something else? Can I lessen the amount of time in another class? And they had a committee that looked at this. So their delay of 55 minutes ended school only 37 minutes later. And remembering, it's always about the kids, right? If that's what we're trying to do, if we're talking about sports, their athletic performance is better and their injuries are less if we get them to sleep more. Then there's schedules, and this just takes time. Like, you need to have all the stakeholders at the table, but one of the things we realized when we started to see schools do this, and I think teachers recognized this last year, when they were teaching their first and second period virtually, as hard as it was to do virtual, the teachers were saying they were not seeing a drop-off in the attention of the students in their first and second period like they normally do at 7:20 in the morning when they're here in class. So the teachers were saying, man, this felt better. And when they studied and they surveyed teachers, the teachers in general, as much as a lot of them liked the earlier exit period from school, they said they felt better about their day. They just felt better when the school start times were shifted a little bit. Choosing not to change the start times, remember, not doing something has its own impacts. And so we talked about that. You have adolescents, sleep deprived, 3,000 kids a year who are sleep deprived. Again, the 12 o'clock is if they were getting out early as seniors, but they're out at 2 o'clock, potentially with parents working out of the house. And then you have younger students, like we talked about, getting home in the dark. During the pandemic, I think we learned a couple of main lessons. So the first thing is, people are reluctant to change and they think it's hard. Districts changed in a moment, right? It was like whatever that weekend was in March, and you went from full in person and came back on Monday and had to learn how to do it virtually. And everyone pulled it off. It wasn't perfect in some ways, but you did it, you got it pulled off, and we did that everywhere. So the fact to think that school districts can't achieve changing a school start time by a little bit is silly. The other thing that is, we learned, like we saw, when you made virtual, no school start. Did you guys start at 7:20 when you went virtual? Why not? Because you knew intuitively that you didn't need to start that early. It was a transportation issue. And people felt it. Hopefully parents who are listening, recognize that their kids felt better. Maybe not better because they weren't in school, but their overall health seemed better when they got to sleep a little bit more. And then there's studies that were showing that. So is it worth the effort? There's only a couple of things in your control, right? You can educate students right now and families on the importance of mental health. If we're talking about recognizing mental health, we could probably try to do a better job recognizing it early, trying to provide, I don't know if you guys provide mental health services in school, but the more we can do that, the better. But then you can create policies, right? That's your job, especially the board's job, is to create policies that impact the kids. And the health and well-being of the students really needs to be their priority. And one thing, I was president of the medical staff at Penn Medicine. I finished 2 years ago. So in that role, I represented 1,300 physicians. And our meetings, like the medical executive committee, you would have me representing the physicians and the physicians' needs. And then you have the hospital there representing the hospital's needs. And we're talking about the patients who are not at that meeting. So things would come up, and we would have decisions to make. And when it came down to, we had to do something for the patient, and it might negatively impact the physician. They might have to work harder or find ways to cover things, or it might impact the hospital and they have to pay more. If we would try to mitigate those, right? You try to make it as minimal as possible, but you never said, tough luck to the patients, we're not doing it. And I think that that's really similar to the role here. Like, the students are not at the table. They're the ones who we're doing this for. And we have board members and parents and administration all making decisions. And a lot of people will be impacted, but the students will only benefit from making these types of policies. And you just have to remember that that's the priority. How long should you look for? So 8:30 is the goal. The longer you go, the better. But I really believe that any change is if you could make a change, make it. And if you could reassess from there and make more changes after that, once you hit 20, 25 minutes, I think it's worth it. Don't change things 5 minutes and spend a lot of energy for that. But if you could, if you're at 7:20 and you can get to 8, I think that makes a huge difference to kids. That 40 minutes is really measurable, especially if you could somehow make transportation a little easier and you could shave off. You might get them 50 minutes. That's real sleep to these kids. So what can you do? My recommendation from here, think about this. Like, research it. There's nothing I said that's controversial. Like, you really won't find, it's rare to find a topic that you could talk about that there's not like a counterfactual to this. There's not. Like, no one's arguing that any of this science is wrong. There's no reason that you guys can't talk about good sleep hygiene even now and just talk to people about the importance of sleep. And that's consistency, limiting social media. As a district, you could assess your homework. You can work on mental health issues. You could analyze transportation. It doesn't cost much to try to figure out if you can make that more efficient. And if other districts, I've heard schools want to tackle this, and I've had other districts call them and say, don't do it because it's going to be really hard when we play you. Don't do that. Like, if you hear other districts doing it, be supportive of them doing it. But the real goals, I'd get data. I mean, it sounds like you guys can tell me where you stand, but figure out where you guys are, form a committee, talk about this. It sounds like you guys were doing this right before the pandemic. Get everyone involved, use resources. So right now, like, Radnor did a great job. They actually put out like a 65-page color booklet on this. Princeton, I think, took 2 years or 3 years. So when we talk about this, you do not need to take that long. You need to have enough lead time to let people know, understand, make change. But you could really watch what others did, learn from that, and much more quickly move through the process. Focus on mental health, and if you're going to consider mental health a priority, think about school start times as part of that plan. And set a reasonable time frame. Like, it shouldn't be a week, but it's kind of silly to say, like, we're going to tackle this in the next few years. There's surveys you can put out, and I'll leave this up here as I have 2 concluding slides. So this is Senator Portantino, and he goes on to talk about that this is no different than like having a minimal temperature for the rooms in the building. And teaching adolescents at a time they cannot effectively learn is an ineffective use of public funds and undermines our children's health and their chance for success today and in the future. Kyla Wallstrom's a huge researcher in this. And implementing later high school start times is a significant change that positively affects their kids' health, safety, and learning. If we have the will, we can find the way. Judith Owens, to do nothing, which is what a lot of us keep doing, is to really do harm. And to the 25 people who are here, but all the people who are listening, it doesn't take a lot of people. It just takes a few champions to decide that you want to do this. So I will stop there, and did it in an hour. That was 178 slides, by the way. Thank you. And I'll take questions. I mean, there's the audience. I'm happy if the audience wants to send questions, and you can tell them how. We'll try to answer them, but I'll take questions from here.
So you can take questions from here, but we're also going to put a slide up for school start time questions.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah. Yes. So happy to answer any questions. And
I just wanted to comment that this year has been particularly difficult for us because of our lack of bus drivers. So trying to reorganize our routes with, we started the year with like 19 less bus drivers that we had. So the desire, I really have the desire to make this happen, but this is a little bit of a bump that we have to get over.
I totally get that. And I mean, COVID, there were a lot of districts that were getting really close, and then COVID hit.
Well, that was us.
Yeah, totally. And I get it. And that's life. And now we have lots of shortages everywhere with employees. So that doesn't I don't blame anyone for not doing it, but don't lose your willpower. Like
No,
that is what you
absolutely
should
not.
get re-energized to say, we're better now, and you start setting your sights for the next academic year. And if it can't be the next, set your sights for the soonest possible time, because things will start to get better, and and a lot of this takes planning.
Well, I think that to me, what we were able to accomplish with virtual learning, we were all just amazed at what we could do so quickly. And this is something that we can do also, and is not even as big a deal as what we had to deal with last year.
That's well said. Perfectly agree.
I heard from some parents who say, or what would you say to parents who say, well, that's what the science is saying now, but it's always changing. Because some parents I saw on social media felt like this is coming up all of a sudden. I mean, I know for me, I did not know that schools used to start at 9 o'clock until the 80s or late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, so part of it would be, I guess, because we didn't have the data about it because the kids weren't going to school that early. But how would you answer that parent?
So I think that you're totally right. So the school, it started really, it's probably the early 80s that we saw the suburban towns blowing up and the push coming. And then the data started to come in the 90s. It was a decade of that. And then, so Kyla Wallstrom, they started to do this in Minnesota in the kind of late 90s. And they were researching it, and they saw, man, it made a huge difference. So this is not new. This is 25-year-old data. The policy statements that came out in 2014 were recognizing kind of a decade of data, but it really wasn't a lot of education. Like as a pediatrician, when I started talking about this to some of my partners, I got the same incredulous look. Like their parents are not wrong for being like, what are you talking about? Like, it's just get up. And, again, I think our generation, like I went to school at this time, so it did not, I remember feeling terribly, but I just assume it's, I don't know, adolescence or whatever. So the data is there. The recognition of why it was really came to the forefront. And 2014, when I was lecturing, I started to talk to superintendents who also did not, the general gist was, it's fine, it's not a big deal. It has really caught on over the last few years, a lot of information, a lot of education about it. So I think we see a lot more people recognizing. So we're talking about it a lot more now, but it's based on data that's 20 to 30 years old. Nothing new.
Thank you.
Hi there. How does teenage sleep deprivation affect their immunity as well as the teenage rate of COVID?
The latter part, I don't know, but what we do know is sleep deprivation definitely impacts immunity. So not to draw a direct correlation to COVID, but for everyone. So, and that is not a teenage specific, the circadian rhythm shift is a teenage specific thing. The sleep deprivation for humans negatively impacts immunity. So it's carcinogenic to be sleep deprived, but it definitely lowers your immune response, making it easier to get sick when you have less sleep. There was just a good lecture on that. And it was pretty comprehensive, so there's not a lot of questions.
I'll take that. Thank you again, Dr. Mandelbaum. So as he said, he volunteered to do this. He does it around the area. Incredibly appreciative of your efforts of coming out tonight. In terms of next steps as a district, if you're just tuning in now, just as a quick aside, this has been recorded. It'll be posted online either this evening or tomorrow. So you'll be able to follow along, watch the lecture again, and see the slides. But if you're tuning in late, so as a district, we did a restart after COVID. There's a lot of folks who were part of a committee, and this work had begun. It took a little side note, a sideline, but we've brought it back. We're going to reassemble the committee. We did a survey. In that survey, we got some student sleep times through that and some parent information regarding that. And our hope is to come back, review the data, work with our transportation department, which we've already been working with, and come back with a recommendation to move us forward. So I think we have the support, the community, as you said, it's pretty much a no-brainer. It's just a matter of can you do it. So we've already had conversations with athletics, with transportation, and for us it's just a matter of putting all the pieces together. But I think the want and the will is to do it. So that's it. Thank you out in TV land. We're going to, and those of you who are here, thanks for spending time with us. As I said, it will be posted online tomorrow. So, and also, Harry, you're putting up the slide. So the slide is there for, if you have any questions specifically, I can get them to Dr. Mandelbaum if we can't answer them ourselves. So thank you and good night.